So, Lugia, you got an intro?
Intro. Where we're going, we don't need intros.
Okay, welcome to It's Always Sunny in what's the town in this movie called
Hill
again? It's
Valley.
always sunny. It's always sunny in the future. Fuck it, I don't know.
Hill Valley. It's
Yeah,
it's
the great future of
Hill Valley. Come
1985.
on.
Yeah, welcome to the Back to the Future, I guess, trilogy episode because like we all have seen all three of them, even
Mhm.
though we're probably going to focus mostly on the first one.
More so
But
the first one, yeah.
want to give a rundown on some background?
I could do a couple things, but you guys would probably know more than me.
All right.
I know a little bit about the second and third movie's development, though, so that'll be interesting to talk about. But for this one, we have Robert Zemeckis in the director's chair for this one. This came out in July 3rd, 1985. Very fitting considering the time period that this movie's supposed to take place in, or rather what the present's called.
Yeah, it's literally supposed to be 85s. Yeah.
This movie had a budget of $19 million, and it made $388.8 million, so, yeah, this was pretty fucking huge.
It was the highest grossing film of 1985.
Absolutely, like, you couldn't beat numbers like that.
I could probably say the biggest fun fact about this movie is the fact that Michael J. Fox, while he was the first choice for Marty, couldn't actually be in it because of scheduling conflicts, so they casted Eric Stoltz. But they decided that Eric Stoltz kind of sucked for the role after they were already started filming, so they worked out a deal with Michael J. Fox to.
I think I read somewhere that because of his scheduling conflicts, like, by the time he got to the set and he had to finish, he was, like, super fucking drained. Because he was, like, doing other projects alongside Back to the Future.
He was on a TV show, so basically he would, like, film during the day, the TV show, and then at night he would do this, or, like,
Yeah.
the other way around.
And he only got,
So,
like, maybe 1, at most 2 hours of sleep.
He didn't get, like, the most rest. Yeah, although it's funny, that added only $4 million to the budget, refilming the stuff, which, you know, is a lot, but it's not.
They were able to make it back in spades, so.
Yeah. And that was the only real, I guess, technical difficulty in the film, which makes sense because this is an incredibly tight script. You know, they're inspired by like Frank Capra and Twilight Zone to like design the settings of the 50s place, and
I know they wanted to do like a time travel story, but they didn't know exactly how they would make a compelling narrative.
it seems like they figured out most of the problems in like the scripting stage. So like during the actual production, things went pretty smoothly. The old man makeup here was like pretty good because I remember when I first like saw this movie growing up, I didn't actually like realize that the older parents were played by the same actors as like the young version, and that was all makeup. So I was like, oh damn, that's impressive. Like looking at it now, because I guess I'm better at recognizing faces. So I was like, oh shit, they're the same people.
I mean, I guess that helps considering that they're supposed to sell you the idea that these are the same people, just like 30 years younger and older.
Yeah, but I assumed it was like, a Men in Black 3 situation where like Josh Brolin, he just like really pulled it off, so you couldn't even tell that it wasn't Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
anyway,
the one thing that always confused me is how come Doc looks almost no younger in the 50s than he does in the 80s?
He has shorter hair.
he actually
Yeah,
does
but
look- that's the
a
thing.
little-
He actually does look older. Is just it's a more subtle kind of old, but like you know that gag in Back to the Future 2 where he like rips off that thing.
Mhm.
They ripped off the thing because he actually is wearing old man makeup. I just don't think people realize he was wearing old man makeup, but he is. Like his face is like so much less wrinklier. Like that's the thing, but like it's just I don't know. He just like still looks good. You know, it's not like such a huge shift because he's already kind of old. He's like he goes from basically like I don't know like what 50 to 80. I think that was the idea or something or 40 to
So 30 years.
70. Like he was already a grown man in the 50s, so I guess they maybe could have made his hair like a little, not made it white, but whatever.
And in the end, it doesn't really matter.
I'll just get into the film, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so I feel like the plot we don't really need to say, but like
We could just go over the general premise, like its thesis statement.
Yeah, but it's basically the film is basically about a kid in the 80s inadvertently getting sent back in time and fucking up his parents' relationship by accident while trying to get back. So it's kind of like we have the plot of them trying to figure out how to get back, and the plot of him trying to get his parents together. And throughout that, he kind of learns to kind of appreciate his parents and grow to kind of understand that they're people, too. The kind of contrast between his perception of his parents versus who they were when they were younger, and also just this contrast of like 50s and 80s culture is kind of where the most of the humor of the film comes from. Also, he ironically through his relationship with his parents, he kind of inadvertently changes the future for the better for himself, which is kind of fun.
This movie is the ultimate comedy.
This is a rock solid script. Like that's like the first thing you gotta mention is that like this movie has like a billion setups and payoffs, and it all like works. Like
Yeah, there are so
rewatching,
many little details that you wouldn't notice the first time around. Like even during the opening moments in 1985, those all relate to the eventual 1955. It's amazing how everything connects together.
yeah, and even like just some like one-off jokes. Like they have like this like joke where it's like, "Oh, your uncle's in prison," and then when he like sees his uncle in 1955, he's a baby and he's in his crib, so he's like, "Oh, you better get used to these bars." And I was like,
And he doesn't even want to leave his crib. He cries when they take him out.
yeah. That's like a blink and you miss it kind of joke, honestly, because like I straight up did miss it the first time I watched the movie. Because like for some reason the first 10 minutes of the movie I always forget about it. But like yeah, the first act sets up a lot, and it's
Out of
kind of
curiosity, for
like I
this
would say like
episode, did you guys just watch the first film, or did you rewatch the
I wanted
sequels?
to make up for Fallen Angels, so I saw all three.
I just saw the first one, but I still remember like the other two pretty well, so it's not like
Okay, I saw all three, and it's funny you mention the subtleties and stuff later on because I noticed in each film there's slight call or references to stuff to come. For example, when Doc first invents the time machine, he says like I could place bets to know who wins games.
yeah, no, I noticed
Yeah.
that too, and I was like rewatching the first one, I was like, oh, so this is where like they decided to pick up these little details that they didn't actually have a
And in,
payoff for, and then they decided to pay it off, and it was like that's
yeah, and
kind
in
of
the
fun.
second film, there's a lot of Western references, like the Wild Gunman, and they're watching the good, the bad, and the
Well, the
ugly.
reason behind that was because the second and the third films were done
They filmed at the
simultaneously.
same time, yeah. It was kind of
Those
like
were
how
planned. Back to the Future 1 was just going to be standalone before it made
I
in all
mean,
that money.
still cool anyway.
yeah, and like you see like they reference like Biff's like Western ancestor in Back to the Future too. That was like one of the details I picked up on. I was like, oh, that's kind of clever.
Actually,
And
one thing
obviously,
I noticed upon rewatching the first film, there is no chicken line.
Yes, that wasn't a thing until the second
yeah,
one.
no,
That
I knew
surprised
that one
me.
because like that was the stuff that always like threw me off when I saw the second movie because I like when I saw the sequels, I was always like, where did that come from? Because like that just feels like they just inserted that into this film, but like yeah, Marty was never like it didn't seem like wasn't really the impulsive type. I mean, he was like a little bit impulsive because he just kind of like he did
I
pick
mean,
fights with
yeah,
in the past,
in
but like the impulsiveness was
1955
more
in
of
the
like
cafeteria when Biff's about to deck him, he tries to fight back before he's stopped by the principal.
yeah, yeah. So there was like they do set up his impulsiveness, but they kind of localize the impulsiveness a bit more in that one.
Honestly, I don't
Um,
think the whole chicken thing was really needed for Marty's character. It's something that I never really liked about the changes that they introduced into and onwards.
I think the fact that that it's like specifically chicken feels forced. Like if it was just an insult, then I would see him like then I think it makes sense. But the fact that they like specifically highlighted in chicken and like it doesn't like pay off to a joke. It's just that one word. It
Yeah,
reminds
but
me like barbed wire.
you're telling me
It
he can
reminds me
take
like
the term butthead just fine, but not chicken.
yeah, that's the thing. Like it's like when you watch like Space Jam or barbed wire is like don't call me babe or don't call me doll. It's like okay, what if they like call you something else? Like why is it just that specific word? And like I don't know. That's like the only thing I think is kind of weird about the sequels. Like that's like the one thing that always just kind of stuck to my head out. It was like that was a bizarre choice. Going through this film, it kind of made me realize something about like a lot of 80s blockbusters is that they all have really, really tight structure. And I realized I think that's why structure matters so much to people nowadays more than people who like older films. And that's because like basically like the 80s is kind of like the bedrock of what most cinema is based off of now. And all of those, like they really value structure. So I was like, oh, okay. So that's like it makes sense. So like obviously me showing you like Chunking Express or No Country for Old Men, those are like movies that like are made for people who watch like really old stuff that doesn't have like a super loose structure. Like I told you about the French New Wave last week, right?
Think
Did you?
so.
I
Breakfast.
don't
I think
remember.
okay. The thing with the French New Wave is that they were actively trying to like break away from structure, and the French New Wave inspired like so many filmmakers from like the 70s and 90s, which is why a lot of those films have like loose structures and stuff. But a lot of 80s films were inspired by like classic like 50s musicals and like stuff with a lot more structure. So I think it's like interesting. So a lot of blockbusters are inspired by like old Hollywood stuff, which was had a very structured element to it. When a lot of more 90s, 70s like uh films are more inspired by French cinema, which didn't give a fuck about structure, which is why so yeah, I just think that's kind of an interesting element because like this is the first film that made me like really click with it because like 50s films are actually incredibly tightly structured, and so is this. So I was like, ah. And then I realized, like, wait, like Ghostbusters and all the other like classic 80s films, they also have like a ridiculously tight structure to it. And like Indiana Jones, it was like, okay, I think that's why like so many people on YouTube, like when they do like reviews and stuff, it's mostly focused on like plot function rather than other elements. And
I
that's
mean,
just
the
like a
script
general,
is the most important part.
not really actually. Like that's the thing. Like people think the script is the most important part, but like it's not.
I mean, it is important.
Like it isn't like theory, but like it's really not. Like Saving Private Ryan has a dog shit script, but the reason it works is just because it has a good structure. Like that's the thing. Like script doesn't really matter, and like there are a lot of good films that don't like care about structure, but like everything else about the script is good. It's like it. I don't think it's as important as people make it out to be, or at least the parts that people think is important about the script isn't as important as people make it out to be. That's why it's like more of a direction because like a director they know what to focus on. So like Spielberg, he was like, okay, all the actual like writing in this script kind of sucks, but I'm just gonna focus on this stuff, and no one's really gonna care about the fact that this plot makes no sense with Saving Private Ryan and with Chunking Express and like Taxi Driver and stuff. Like that's had a much more like loose vibe to it, and they're like, yeah, but it's more about like the characters like psychology and stuff. So like the dialogue and more of that element of the script is more important, so they highlight that, and like the structure is more of like put to the wayside. So like I think that's interesting, but yeah, I think it's more of like I guess crowd pleasing films. Plot functionality is better, and films that are trying to be more about character driven stuff is like much more isn't as structured. And like there can be films that do both. Like like Tarantino, he does kind of both, but like I don't know, it kind of depends. When I gotta show you No Country for Old Men, I'm gonna be very interested how you guys take the ending because
I saw that movie very
okay, but
recently.
like how like the first two films is very kind of conventionally structured, and then the last act he's just like fuck it, like they don't actually go in the conventional route you'd assume it does. But like
Yes.
that's why it's so good and memorable to me because like the way the ending did that makes me think. So that's why I don't think structure is actually as
I
important as
have
its
my
full
own
point.
opinion on that, but I'll save that for a later time.
You can just say it now, it doesn't matter.
I did not like the last half hour of that movie.
Yeah, that's the thing. A lot of people don't, but it's like one of those things where like actually the more it sits with you, it's a lot better that way, honestly.
I
Like
get,
that's
well,
the
this
thing.
is just coming off of a first viewing anyway.
Yeah, that's what I mean about like the thematic kind of thing. So like because I don't care about structure as much as I used to. I think that's why like on first viewing I'm able to like get stuff like this, but with like a lot of like Cohen films, I think for like a general audience, the second viewing is what makes it click. That's why like, Big Lebowski is probably like a cult classic instead of just a regular classic because first time you watch it, at the ending, you're just like, well, what the fuck was the point of that? And kind of like Burn After Reading, but then you watch it again, and it's like, oh, okay, I get it now.
True. I
And
did
that's the
like
thing
it
with
a
like,
lot more the second time around.
yeah, that's like the thing with No Country for Old Men. You're like, oh, you're setting up all this like the most of the film was like built on these two conflict, and then like it gets resolved off screen, and you're left the half hour to stew with this sheriff, and like so then you're just kind of left with, well, why did they make that choice? Because like the Coens are smart, and then when you watch it again, you're like, oh, okay, so that was what the point of the story was, the theme and stuff. So that's the thing. Like sometimes I feel what's satisfying from a plot perspective and what's satisfying from a thematic perspective aren't always the same thing. Here it was, and like a lot of like 80s films, it is, which is why I think those are still pleasing to general audiences. But like from like a general like art perspective, I think it is interesting to like sometimes break from elements of structure and things just for the sake of the point you're trying to make. Yeah, like No Country for Old Men. If it wasn't for that ending monologue, I don't think that ending monologue really makes it. Like, and then like when you think about the stuff with Llewellyn, so I'm gonna make you rewatch that one day. I don't know when, but like
One
it's
day.
gonna happen. Yeah,
I
and
wouldn't mind.
actually, the author of No Country for Old Men, the guy who wrote the book and screenplay, I'm actually reading one of his books right now. He's the guy that The Last of Us ripped off.
Huh.
But yeah. Anyway,
Right, what movie are we talking about again?
okay, yeah. So I was saying, Back to the Future, I think has like the perfect script, and the only script that I think really tops it from a structure standpoint is Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is also Zemeckis. So I was like, oh, Zemeckis is just kind of like a master, I guess, at taking like the tightest script ever and then working with that. But the question I want to ask you guys was, so I was talking about like how tight the script is, but there's actually one sequence in the film that has nothing to do with the plot. They just did it because they thought it was fun. So what do you guys think of the Johnny Good sequence?
That shit's
Iconic.
iconic.
Yeah,
It's so
that's
iconic they reuse it in the second movie.
they do.
Yeah,
Again,
remember when
Yeah.
he's back in the 50s and he's trying to save himself from being pummeled? So he drops the bags on the guys because they're waiting for him to finish up.
Oh, okay. Right, yeah, the sequence where he goes back to 55 and like they kind of like interact with the first film. Okay, yeah, I remember. But
That's my favorite part of part 2 because I'm a sucker for that type of structure where it's like when you go back and watch it, you're like, oh, so this was happening on the side.
that is something I noticed with like Back to the
And then
Future
you
and,
realize that Marty decked other Marty in the face with the door unintentionally.
Back to the Future and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I wonder if like the reason the structure is so tight is just because of the topic. Because like with the time travel movie, you kind of do need it to be like it's such a high concept. You kind of do need to understand it. And Who Framed Roger Rabbit's like a mystery noir film, so you're like, yeah, of course, structure is solid there. That genre necessitates it. I just found like the Johnny Be Good sequence interesting because like this whole movie, I was like, oh wow, every single little piece is like set up and paid off, and then this one sequence, which is like the most famous sequence in the movie, is utterly pointless to the plot, and they could have easily just cut it out and nothing would have changed. And no, I guess I just kind of appreciate the fact that they just did something fun just for the sake of it being fun.
It doesn't subtract in any way. It's a good time.
Yeah, it's just like a nice little bonus. I was like, I just appreciate that because I feel like a modern blockbuster, they would cut the scene because it's like, oh, what's this for? Because like I've actually seen like interviews with directors where they're like, I had to really fight for this scene that's super popular just because studios were like, why is this here? Like, there's no point, so just cut it out. And they're like, just nah, you don't get it. People are gonna love it, and it's because like again, like this kind of structure over everything else mindset that, and, like
I mean,
yeah.
sometimes it's fun to just have a pointless musical number in your movie.
Yeah.
Like, remember Ice Age 2, the vultures sing Food, Glorious Food? It has no impact on anything, but I fucking love that scene.
No?
Honestly,
don't remember
I
that?
don't remember shit about any of the Ice Age movies. What
In
the
Ice
hell?
Age 2, there's a scene where
Yeah,
these
there's
vultures are just singing Food,
every-
Glorious Food for no fucking reason. And it's never referenced again, but I remember I loved that scene when I was a kid. I still love it today.
I mean, to be fair, the Ice Age movies are kind of the kings of just kind of like pointless stuff because
I mean, but that scene's the cream of the crop.
no, but I mean like Scrat's like the most iconic part of the Ice Age movies, and he has no bearing on the plot of any of those films. He is just there because they just wanted to do Looney Tunes stuff.
Actually, he does have an impact on the plot of the 5th film, but
Yeah, I
doesn't matter.
know. Doesn't he like?
They were
he, like,
building up to that moment.
his impact is always just like a random setup that they don't actually need Scrat to be there for, but they just decide to like, fuck it, let's just toss him. I thought this was an interesting look at I guess nostalgia and themes because have you ever heard like people discuss that this movie's timeless, but they don't know how long it's going to be timeless for?
No, I don't think I've heard that discussion before.
Nor have I.
Okay, so people think this film is, timeless, is a timeless classic because it kind of is, but at the same time, people are like, as time goes along, I feel like the differences between the 50s and 80s are going to become like less and less in people's memories, and after a certain point, people are going to like see the film, they're going to be like, they're just not going to get it because of like the specific reference to the 80s and 50s, and I disagree, and I think that's because like of the setup of two things. One is that a lot of people think this is like kind of nostalgia pandering to the 50s, but the way I see it is that this is a movie that's perfectly content with the 80s. And the fact is like other movies like about time travel and nostalgia and stuff like that is about like people that want to go to the past. Marty doesn't. He just got thrown there and he's not and he's trying to leave. and it's like more of him like learning to appreciate the past as like a happenstance, you know, getting to know his parents and just kind of liking them as people instead of as that. And they have jokes about the difference between the 80s and the 50s, but that's honestly kind of like just like incidental kind of gags.
Who the hell is John F. Kennedy?
Yeah, like the actual core of the movie is more of just
Ronald
him
Reagan,
and
the
his
actor,
parents.
he's
Yeah.
president.
Yeah, like see those references probably wouldn't make sense like, 50 years from now when people don't like even remember like which presidents were from which decade. Like, if you told me who like which year Taft was in office, I'd be like, I don't fucking know, like 20? I don't know when Taft was president. Like, so yeah, like maybe like 50 years from now, people would be like, Ronald Reagan was president in the 80s? Okay, like I didn't know that. Or like Ronald Reagan's an actor? I didn't know that. Like things like that. But like I think like the actual like a couple of the jokes will be lost to time, but like the actual core stuff won't. And also I feel like a lot of the difference between the 80s and the 50s are actually kind of like set up.
Yeah, I think the way the movie presents 1955 and 1985 is distinct enough to where you can recognize them as different time periods.
Yeah, because like the first half hour is just setting up the 80s, and then when you cut to the 50s, like there's a clear difference. Now, I do think it's interesting how they film the 80s in the same kind of cartoony light as the 50s, and the fact where like it almost feels like the 80s itself is like a nostalgic look back at itself, kind of like because like how the 80s is portrayed in Back to the Future is how the 80s is portrayed in like every 2010s movie that's about the 80s. Like in that same kind of like they're making fun of like the hair metal thing. So like this movie is kind of making fun of its own decade as much as it's making fun of the 50s, which I thought was interesting.
And then there's 2015, but that's a whole different can of worms.
Actually, can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually. Yeah,
Jaws 19. How many Jaws movies do we have now?
4.
After 4, they just stop, yeah.
But I mean, after having lived through 2015, it is interesting to see what they got right and wrong.
Although I will say, I still think like the actual like core of the commentary, because it's like, yeah, there isn't a Jaws 15, but there is like a Spider-Man 9. There's like Fast and Furious 10 is coming out, and these are all like movies from like the last like 20 years. So like they just picked the wrong franchise. But if they picked like I don't know, we're getting a new Indiana Jones movie in like this year. We're getting like a new how many Star Wars movies are there? There's like 12 Star Wars movies. There actually might be 15 Star Wars movies.
Yeah, for counting spin-offs.
Yeah, count spin-offs and like all the different TV shows
and the holiday special.
Yeah, and
I don't think that counts.
like there are franchises with 15. Here's the thing, if they literally picked any other horror franchise, they would have been right. If they'd be like, oh, Jaws 4 is like, oh, it still looks fake, and they're like, what if it was like Halloween? It's like, Michael Myers is gonna kill me. It was like, oh, that mask still looks shitty. It was like the joke would have worked because there are like 20 Halloween movies, and the mask looks shitty in most of them.
Actually, what's funny about the Jaws 19 thing is that a few days ago in school in one of my classes, we were talking about advertising. There actually is a 4D advertising space in Times Square.
Yeah.
It's not too far off. I mean, it's not to the level of, it could come out and bite you.
That's the screen that wraps around the corner of one of the buildings, right? Yeah, I've seen a couple of those for Resident Evil.
I kind of like how they update the 2015, how they echo some scenes from the first movie in 2015, and it's like the same joke, but like it's like honestly kind of funnier in the 2015 version because like
they acknowledge this is all so familiar.
Yeah, but it's not just that, but like when he goes back to the 50s, is like I like a tab. Is like I can't give you a tab unless you order something. It's like when Marty meant tab, he meant tab the drink, but like that drink doesn't exist anymore. But like when he goes to 2015 and he's like ordering like all these drinks and stuff
from Michael Jackson, no less.
Where, like, he like misunderstood shit, and yeah, that's actually one thing kind of funny I thought about the movie, whereas like back when this movie came out, people were probably joking, like, oh, these people in the 50s, they don't understand the 80s. When I feel like a lot of those jokes are still funny now, but it's not not like you're making fun of the people in the 50s. It's like you're like, oh, the 80s is really stupid, and like when the 50s people are like, that's really dumb, like that's kind of funny, like. It was like, oh, that's heavy. It's like, why are you saying heavy? Like, that's like a funny joke about any slang, like with Zoomer slang. It's like, what do you mean Riz? What is Riz? What is this? What's another like Zoomer slang? What is a munch? Like, I don't know. I just thought it was kind of funny because it's like, the joke works like nowadays, but it works for a completely different reason than it did when it first came out. And I think that's just kind of funny. Whereas like we're identifying with the 50s people more actually. than we did
It's
in
another
the
way of
80s.
helping you get invested in this world.
Yeah. And earlier I mentioned how like they filmed each decade in the same kind of cartoony light, and I think that makes it like the fact that the tone is like you can clearly see the differences, but because the tone is the same, it kind of makes it almost feel like a lot changed, but a lot is like still the same. So it kind of the whole theme of like connecting with your kids and connecting with your parents is kind of like it fits more the fact that like you can like just visually see that like yeah, they really aren't that different from each other. And of course the 2015 has like the great theme about like, your kid being just like your parents because like Marty McFly Jr. acts just like George McFly.
Yeah.
And like George actually ends up acting more like Marty once like he alters the future once he gets his confidence and stuff. So it's like a kind of like neat thing. Like George is like an artist and like Marty's an artist. So it's like there's this like neat little parallels with the family and how they all like kind of like are each other or they like become each other and like stuff like that.
And then Marty fucks up his own future because the word chicken is taboo in his personal dictionary.
I would say the payoff in part three is kind of like stronger with yeah, that's the thing. So I don't know if I think this might be an unpopular opinion because I feel like most people talk about Back to the Future 2 more, but Back to the Future 3 is like actually like I like it more than 2.
I am in that same boat actually.
I would disagree. It's still great. I just think 2 is a little bit better.
Here's the thing, I think 2 is fun, but ironically, I think like 3 has just like a better like story slash like kind of point to it, and the fact that 2 is very much like leading into 3, it doesn't actually like resolve any character arcs. 3 does resolve the character arcs, with like the chicken stuff.
Well, or yellow in this case.
I'd say for me with 2, it's the story that kind of had the least no, not the least. It's since they're trying to the whole thing with how 2 starts is that they're trying to fix the future. It feels like it could have easily been resolved by Doc telling Marty in the past slash present what he could have avoided. So it's kind of I don't know.
Yeah.
Does it make sense what I'm trying to say?
No,
Yeah,
it makes sense.
so I'm surprised Doc didn't just like time travel to like when Marty was having, like when Marty
I
and
mean, since they're trying to fix the future, it doesn't really have any impact on their present.
I think this is probably because they weren't thinking about making the sequel at the time. So, like, when Doc says, Marty, it's about your kids. You gotta go to the future. It's like, okay, that's a nice cliffhanger for this movie called Back to the Future. But then when they actually had to make the sequel, they're like, oh shit, we really do need to follow up on this.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that at the start, it's the one with the least stakes. Granted, the stakes do gradually build, but
I like how everything connects into with the almanac and the bad version of 1985. That's probably one of my favorite locations.
the thing is with like 2 and 3 is that they were basically made as like one movie, and we're just like we're talking about it as like it's kind of like Lord of the Rings films, or like the Lord of the Rings movies. It's really just one movie that was just like too long, so they split into 3 parts. Same with Kill Bill, and that's basically like what they did with Back to the Future. Like 2 and
Weird
3,
thing though, to
really
me
the same movie.
anyway, the first movie is perfectly fine as a standalone, whereas with 2 and 3, those work a lot better together.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, yeah,
For
it makes
what?
sense.
For Lord of the Rings or for this?
Back to the
For this,
Future.
yeah.
Because
Yeah,
again,
for this,
2
because
introduced
1 was designed as one movie, and 2 and 3 were designed together. Like
yeah,
2
and
and 3
2
were
introduced a
actually one
lot of
movie
things
together.
that weren't in the original that 3 also follows up upon, like Marty's chicken shtick, fucking needles, shit like
I can
that.
say, I think Back to the Future 2 and 3 are really just one movie that they just split into parts. Which
Yeah.
I think why the part stuff works better, because like Back to the Future Part 2 and 3 is like, yeah, those two
Then
really
why
are
does the
just
first movie feel like the odd one out?
Yeah. Here's the thing though, like since the first movie does end with the setup, like I know they didn't actually like intend on making a sequel initially, but like the setup, it kind of does like make it all just feel like parts of one big story. So like if you just watch them like all together as one thing, it's probably tight, but like it's kind of like here's the thing. I mentioned Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is the trilogy was literally designed like together as one thing, yet somehow part 1 still kind of just works as its own movie. Like you can just watch part 1 and just be satisfied and be like, oh yeah, this is wider journey to be told. But like part 1 kind of like has like a somewhat kind of like clean ending point. Kind of like Star Wars almost, because like with Star Wars, there's definitely the implication that there's like more to come. And Lucas always intended to make sequels to the original Star Wars, but again, like the first one, it always just seems to like completely work as its own film, which I
I
think
mean,
is interesting.
isn't that kind of what? That's kind of the point. Isn't it better to make like one standalone film and hope that you can expand from there than try to
Yeah,
like sequel
I,
bait?
I found it interesting because with the Star Wars and Lord of the Rings is like they knew they were going to make sequels. Like they always planned to make sequels. So I just found it interesting that like they still work as like their standalone things. Because like with Star Wars, Lucas already had it was already working on the second movie. Um, and with Lord of the Rings, they literally shot all three movies at the same time. They just made one movie and then released it in three parts. Same with Kill Bill. So I was like, I just find it interesting that like even with the movies where they were literally designed with sequels in mind, the first part still just kind of works as its own thing on its own. Because like you can just watch Kill Bill 1 and like it just works as its own thing. It's like, yeah. I just find that like kind of interesting just because like
So, I do have a theory that if a part 4 ever happened, it would take place in the Dark Ages, because in the beginning of 3, Doc says, "Well, I mean, in the West, it could have been worse. I could have been in the Dark Ages."
I guess that's what if you want to see Back to the Future, but it's in the Dark Ages, watch Evil Dead 3, Army of Darkness. That
Or
comes out
Bill and Ted.
well Bill and Ted has a very different tone, but yeah.
I
You
mean,
really
I'm
also
perfectly
Bill and
content
Ted?
with the trilogy we have. It's perfect as it
Yeah,
is.
no, I think all three of these are great.
The Telltale game's pretty good too. So if you actually do want more, what play the Telltale games. The continuity isn't as tight as it is with the first three, but like all the characters are good and it's a fun story in its own right. So yeah,
I don't know, I'm perfectly
They'll-
content with
they
having a
shouldn't
trilogy of
make
films just stay as a trilogy.
yeah. I'm glad that it's only a trilogy, but there is a lot like of extra like Back to the Future stuff out there, like with just
There is,
kind of
but it's like the Matrix pre-Resurrections, where there is offshoots that
yeah. No,
continue the
what I'm
story.
saying is like I don't think they should make another movie, but like a lot of the spin-offs and like the side projects are actually pretty good. So like I'd recommend people check out like the TV show or the video game and stuff like that because those are actually good. By video game I mean the Telltale game and the Famicom one. Don't play the NES one. We've all seen the Angry Video Game Nerd episode.
So we've talked about 55, 85, 15. Can we talk about 1885 now?
The old West.
Yeehaw.
Yeah. So we mentioned
Okay,
this earlier, but this is like me and Patrick. That's our favorite from the not our favorite, but like we like it more than two.
I'm gonna be completely honest. Of the Back to the Future movies, I think this is the one I've seen the most because I first saw Back to the Future when I was a kid. Like I remember I was 6 years old. It was Christmas morning, and this was one of the gifts my parents got me. We just spent the whole day watching the trilogy. It was great. But being like a 6-year-old kid, I loved Thomas the Tank Engine. So the ending of this movie with the train and the DeLorean picking up speed, I watched that over and over and over again. Like when I was a kid, like
Did
if
the
it had a
time
train in it,
traveling
that
flying
was an
train make you shit
that was an
yourself?
that was an easy yeah, that was an easy way to get into my heart. The last 30 minutes of this movie, I loved when I was younger and I still love to this day. It is such a great sequence.
So here's a fun parallel that I thought was pretty interesting about Back to the Future Part 3 and 1 is that Back to the Future 1 is entirely about like the relationship between Marty's parents, and 3 is basically about Doc Brown being in a relationship himself. And I thought that was a nice kind of little cute sort of thematic link, even if it wasn't there's like no direct link, like how 2 had a bunch of like direct links. But this was like
He
this
did
one is
say after the DeLorean he was going to dedicate his science to understanding women.
yeah.
Well, I mean,
Like
makes sense.
I think it's interesting. Like Back to the Future Part 3 to me is like much more in line with the first movie because it's about Marty being sent to the past. It's about this relationship thing. It's about him trying to get back to the future. So effectively, Back to the Future Part 2 is like really the odd one out because that's the one that does like all this weird stuff is the actual one that's actually in the future. This one is basically kind of like a remake of the first movie just in the Old West. And I talked about like the nostalgia kind of looking back in the look back at the past, and this is also kind of a funny thing because he doesn't time travel back to the actual 50s. He basically travels back in time to the 50s of the old westerns. I mean, he travels back to the west, like the
It's
westerns of
1885,
50s
not
movies.
55.
No, the point I'm trying to articulate is that in Back to the Future 1, Marty travels back to like a kind of cartoony, sort of nostalgic version of the 50s. And in Back to the Future Part 3, he travels basically back to the cartoony, nostalgic look at the Western times that people in the 50s were making. Like he basically went into a 50s Western movie. That's what I'm trying to
Okay.
say.
All right, that makes sense.
It's like this ain't actually like this ain't what like the actual Western was about, but he was like, is this it's just like an interesting thing because like the 50s was when like the Westerns was like kind of at their peak popularity. So it's like again, there's a thematic link back to the first movie that I just think is interesting. I
It
also
shows
think
you how tight this whole trilogy is.
yeah. It's also kind of interesting to me because what do I say? The Western was fucking box office poison in the 80s. Like the 80s is like the one decade where like there were like no successful Westerns. And I honestly kind of think like this almost seemed like an excuse for Robert Zemeckis to like shoot Western stuff because he liked Westerns and he was like, there's no studio's letting me make a Western, so I'm gonna make my fucking Back to the Future movie a Western. Fuck you.
Hey, that's dedication.
That is. And I'd say it worked out incredibly well.
I think Mary Steenburgen, Clara Clayton, the addition to she is great. Like she's a great character.
It's
She's
a wonderful addition.
yeah. Very late addition, but it's great. Yeah. So,
Okay, there's one thing about Clara that I didn't like. I think it was a plot hole too. So in the correct present, right? The ravine is called Clayton Ravine because Clara fell into the cliff, right?
mhm.
And apparently Doc's tombstone mentioned something about Clara. However, if she fell into the ravine, they never would have met, right? Which is how the course of time was supposed to happen.
Huh.
What do you mean?
S-
What do you mean about his tombstone?
In the picture.
I get what you're saying, Lugia, and actually, yeah.
I don't get
Did
it.
I miss something, or is that just how it
Yeah.
is?
No,
What's
okay,
the problem?
Red, let me explain. The whole reason that Doc met Clara is because they went to see the end of the railroad tracks, because Marty was there. If Marty
Mhm.
never went back in time, he wouldn't be there, he wouldn't have met Clara and saved her. So how would they have met?
What do you mean?
Never
Like,
mind.
I'm not
I mean,
getting it. So like they only met. So like yeah, but like
they only met because
what's the
Marty
plot
was
hole?
there.
Yeah, I know that, but what's the plot hole? Did
The
Marty
plot
only
hole
travel
is that
back?
how would Clara have met Doc? Because on Doc's tombstone it says like in memory, like it says
So did
Clara on
Marty
his
did,
tombstone.
did Marty go back in time because he saw the Clara stuff on the tombstone?
No, he went back in time because he saw Doc on the tombstone.
It did mention Clara on there, though.
They did
Yeah,
mention
where
Clara,
did
but
they put Clara on the
that wasn't
tombstone?
important then.
Oh, okay. Then oh, I don't know. Maybe that was just maybe it's one of those you ever heard of the causal loop theory of time travel?
No.
Here's the thing. Back to the Future, so the causal loop kind of theory of time travel is like when you travel back in time and you do something that causes something in the future, but if you didn't travel back in time, that would have never caused. And it's kind of like a loop, and it's
Oh
like
yeah,
what
yeah, that.
are-
Okay, but here's the
that's basically
thing.
what it is.
Back to the Future 3 establishes this rule too, where things in the past still can affect the future. They just need to happen in the past. When during the fucking Mad Dog Tannen fight.
That doesn't contradict the causal loop though.
No, but the events still need to happen before. God, explaining this shit is so goddamn weird.
This is a very tightly structured series, but the actual like logic isn't the clearest, and it also doesn't really matter because like here's the
I
thing.
mean, any time travel
If you're
movie
just-
is gonna have plot holes. Let's be real.
Because like listen, because if we're just talking about it, the Marty in the timeline that like Marty goes to at the end of the film of the first one, effectively what happened is that there was a Marty that lived his own life, and then one day a version of him from another timeline just kind of replaced him. Like that's the same thing that happened with the X-Men Days of Future Past, because like clearly that Marty would have had like a different life. Like but like our Marty, he's from the other timeline, so it's like like logic wise, effectively like it's kind of like it's kind of a mess, but like it also doesn't matter. So like, whatever.
At least they fixed it at the end by making it Eastwood Ravine.
Yeah, that was a cute little gag, and I think that was almost like a kind of throwback to the whatchamacallit, like the Twin Pine Mall, and that got changed to One Pine Mall after Marty ran over the.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, overall, 2 thumbs up to the first movie, and I guess 1 thumb up to the rest.
I
All
would
pretty good.
give the first one a 10 out of 10, and every subsequent sequel just has a number off. So 9 out of 10 for Back to the Future 2 and 8 out of 10 for 3.
I'd say
It's
my
just
rank would go 1, 3, and 2. But again, they're all great movies.
yeah.
It's funny
Like,
though.
I would not call any of these movies bad.
No, far from it. What I find
Absolutely not.
funny though is that when people think of Back to the Future, they probably think of the second one the most because it has stuff to do with the future. Or at
Actually,
least
it's
what
just because
was the
Back
future.
Which
Back
is
to the
now the
Future 2 has
past.
like
Exactly.
all the weird stuff.
Ooh.
Back to the Future 2 just has like all like the kind of like weird stuff and all like the weird ideas because here's the thing, people are like, oh, this is an actor to. I don't think Robert Zemeckis was actually trying to predict what 2015 was like. I think Blade Runner was trying to predict the actual future, but I don't think actually any of these people were trying to actually predict the future. They were just like, wouldn't it be funny if this happened, or wouldn't this be cool? Like, isn't this a cool idea? That'd be neat if that was a thing. And like,
What I do find funny is that one of the biggest predictions in Back to the Future 2 is hoverboards. We technically do have
They
hoverboards.
don't hover,
Well,
but they're
they're
called
called
that.
hoverboards, whatever.
oh no, there are hoverboards that actually hover. It's just like they only work in like a very limited capacity.
I remember seeing on TV like 10 years ago they actually do have a flying car. It's just they can't put it on the public because you need a very specific license for it, and they're still
Here's the
trying to
thing,
work it out.
a lot of the tech actually does exist. It's just that it's kind of pointless. So people are like, what the fuck do we do with it? Like, it's like, okay, we got a flying car. It's like, okay, so we're just gonna like give regular people airplanes now? Like, what's the? They're like need to learn like about flight paths because like there are roads in the skies actually. Like you're not allowed to like go off certain flight paths. Is like drone people have to do with these licenses too and stuff. So it's like yeah, it's kind of just like a lot of this stuff does exist. It is just too inconvenient for there to be any actual like practical use outside of like in highly specified areas. So like military, they'll probably use like some of this shit.
I mean, that's the fun of any
No one
movie in
will.
the future, which is now the past, to see what they got right and wrong.
Yeah.
Like the newspaper that they have is full of like little details.
Yeah. Um. Oh, elephant in the room. We didn't talk about how Biff is meant to be a parody of Donald Trump.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that and after
And
the whole
Griff.
time with how he basically took over in the alternate future. We've lived through a Trump presidency, so not too far off.
I kind of find it funny how like I feel like culture like dramatically shifted during the Trump presidency, and now it's just kind of like reverting. Like I remember like a lot of people like they were like overthinking so much stuff. Like I remember during the Trump presidency, people really hated South Park. And now and
Really?
Family Guy because they're like, oh, you know, South Park is edgy and it's reactionary. That's the reason why Trump is in office. But nowadays people are just like, actually, maybe that was a dumb thing to think. And South Park is like more popular than ever. South Park is actually more popular now than it was before the Trump presidency. Now, like I see
I
people talk about it all the fucking time. You ever go on TikTok? It is insane. People on TikTok, fucking love Family Guy and South Park. It's crazy. How did those shows get a resurgence? Simpsons like the only long running show that people that just went off the tubes and never really came back. And that's the one that people consider the best.
Go back to the Trump thing for a second. I realized something. So in the 50s, Reagan was an established actor. 30 years
Yeah.
later, in the 80s, he became president. In the
In the 80s,
80s, Trump was an established star. 30 years later, he became president.
Don't forget, he
Yeah.
was in
What
Home Alone 2.
he was, but
So
Well,
that technically makes him an actor.
what rising star from the 2010s should we have an eye on?
Tom Holland.
Um,
He can't even like run. He's like it's
no, he
literally
can't.
illegal for him because he's
Um,
British. I don't know. Is Timothy Chalamet American?
I don't know.
Actually, I don't think Timothy Chalamet would run for The Rock. Fuck it, it's The Rock. Duh.
The Rock
Okay.
has said like
Listen,
he's
if Arnold
considered-
Schwarzenegger could be a senator, which has happened, anything is possible. Alright, well, I believe it's now Patrick's turn.
It is. All right, so with this one, we're going to be doing something we haven't done in a while.
Oh,
Checking out a film based on a cartoon. the only time we've done this was Pokemon, right?
I think
Yeah.
so.
All right. Well, similar to Pokemon, this is
Oh
kind
wait,
of a
Speed Racer technically.
what?
Speed Racer technically.
Okay, yeah, that. But this is actually an animated film,
Yeah.
not a live action film that's trying to be
Yes.
an animated film. Anyway, like Pokemon, this is a pretty iconic show from the 90s and to a certain extent the 2000s. And I have not seen this one in quite a while, and I don't know how familiar you guys are with this cartoon, so it'll be interesting to see.
Is
So
it
for next week, we're checking out the first Rugrats movie.
No. Okay.
okay. Interesting.
All right.
You guys
I'm going to
familiar with
admit something
Rugrats?
right away. I am not
What the
very
dogs
familiar
are?
with Rugrats.
Ah, all right. I'm very curious then.
I watched Rugrats as a kid. It was one of those shows that I watched, but it was never a show that I really sought out because it was just when it was on, I was like, sure. It's like one of those shows where like I didn't love it, but it wasn't bad.
I know a
So
couple things about it, and the meme where like the dad says these kids got to get fucking mixed, but that's about it.
Yeah, Rugrats was a bit after our time. I mean, it was still on air when we were born, but it was kind of in its last few years.
Rugrats was always just like an interesting phenomenon to me because like Rugrats to me was basically like Fairly Odd Parents was, in that like the actual like really culturally defining like super popular show was Ren and Stimpy, and Rugrats just happened to air at the same time, around the same time. It was just super successful, but it hasn't really like left quite the impact. And same like Fairly Odd Parents, like SpongeBob. That's like the real like cultural juggernaut show that really like influenced animation, and everyone still talks about. And Fairly Odd Parents is a show that people like, people remember, but it's not like it didn't really like have any like wider effect on anything. Like that's what seems to me. It's just like a successful, well-made show. And that's it.
So
That's
you
all it
mentioned
is.
this was the first Rugrats movie. Does it go by
There
a
are
specific name?
It's just called the Rugrats movie.
Oh, okay.
We're not seeing Rugrats in Paris or Rugrats in the Jungle or whatever it's called.
Weird thing with me is I have more
Rugrats Go
nostalgia
Wild.
for the movies than the actual show. Like I watched a few episodes when I was younger, but I
So
watched the movies more.
I think it's crazy that of all the Nick shows that got movies from like the 90s, uh they gave it to like the worst ones. Like I don't think Rugrats is a bad show. I do think Doug is a bad show. But why did those two get the movies and not Ren and Stimpy or Rocco, which are like the actual shows people like? I mean, Rocco got a new one now,
You
but
don't
like
want to see more of Mr. Dink
who's Mr. Dink? Oh, right,
from
yeah.
Doug?
I forgot. I don't remember these characters' names. I just like know there's like fucking
The guy who says you broke my grill.
um
It's funny when Doug got its cartoon, it was under the Disney iteration, not even the
yeah,
Nickelodeon one.
I don't know. These shows are just kind of like boring to me. But like again, not like there's nothing like actively bad about them. It's just like I don't know, it's boring. Like Rugrats actually was a bit fun with like because it kind of had like a cool little art style thing going on, and Angela and Angelica, what's her name?
Angelica.
Angelica? Yeah, she's a fucking bitch and it's hilarious. Like she's a great antagonist.
This should be an interesting one because we got different perspectives on the show. Actually,
Here's the thing: I don't remember anything about the first Rugrats movies. The ones I remember are the other two, because I remember Rugrats in Paris because it had Who Let the Dogs Out, and I remember the third one because
it was a crossover movie technically
it was that's not the
with
part
the
I remember.
Wild Thornberries.
I just remember like the some of the character stuff with like Chucky and his new brother or whatever, Dill.
That's this one.
Rugrats the movie was the one with Dill.
Yeah,
I remember there being a scene where like Chucky's in the jungle with like Dill or some stuff.
that's the kid from the crazy kid from Wild Thornberries.
My memories of all these movies, I think, have just blended together, man.
Well,
Whatever.
regardless, don't worry.
Yeah, we're watching part one of the Rugrats trilogy.
We're probably not gonna.
All
We're
three
probably
again.
we're probably not doing all three.
If you guys want to discuss all three, like we did with
Yeah.
this one, I mean, by all means,
I
I'm
mean,
probably just gonna see this one.
Probably not. I'm only
No.
gonna watch. I'm gonna watch the first one. I might watch the second one just because the Who Lets the Dogs Out scene is like is ingrained in my mind.
Actually,
But,
You
guys,
can just share that with us.
wait, guys. I'm gonna be completely honest about something. I really want to talk about Rugrats in Paris. I almost chose that, but I decided to go with this one just to ease you guys in.
Is there
Do you
continuity?
No, but do you want to make this a double feature and talk about Rugrats in Paris as
I
well?
don't know.
Sure. Fuck it.
I really
They're
don't
both-
know.
They're both very short, but I kind of really want to talk about Rugrats in Paris just cause
Here's the Rugrats
I'm
in
very
Paris is,
curious.
like, iconic one. Like Rugrats in Paris is the one that everyone kind of remembers. So like, part of me is kind of like maybe we should just do that one just because like I don't know. It's your choice.
Well,
I mean, if you want to
I-
do both of them, I don't have any objections.
fuck it, yeah.
All right, double feature. Let's go.
Double,
Yeah. Besides, the Rugrats movies are like pretty short anyway. They're like
yeah.
I think the first one's only like 70 minutes or something. Like,
Yeah,
I'm-
that's pretty short.
Yeah. So we're just gonna talk about the first two.
yeah.
I'll be honest,
like,
I don't really remember much about the third one. That's the one I watched the least. But
yeah. Oh,
first
dude.
two
Both these movies are under. Not only are they under 90 minutes, but like Rugrats in Paris is like that's like a 79-minute movie. Like that is. These are not long films.
Yeah, I could
All
get
right.
through these in an
Like,
afternoon.
It's like
This
barely,
works out.
barely feature length. Yeah.
Great. All right, so another. Okay, we've been doing a lot of trilogies and doubles lately.
It's been
Jesus.
a trend.
It has been. Red, are you gonna break that trend? Or are you gonna continue it?
I'm breaking the trend. Yeah.
Okay.
I already have my next movie planned. It's a complete standalone. Not only is it a standalone, it is the only movie this director has made.
Really? All right.
We'll save that though.
We will.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, guys. How about we make like trees and get out of here?
Jesus, it's Leave, you idiot, you butthead.